Welcome to Seeking Justice. My name is Mary Kendall Hope, and today I have as my guest Representative Amos Quick, Democrat of our North Carolina House of Representatives.
Good
So nice to
morning.
have you with me.
Thank you for having me again. I appreciate the
Oh,
opportunity to be here with you.
I think I likely appreciate it more, and on behalf of those that you represent as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm enjoying being a representative. I enjoy taking the people's issues further, and hopefully I can continue to do that with the re-election season coming up.
I hope so as well. So, how have you been doing?
I've been doing great. Thanks for asking. I have been very busy, but I anticipated that, and that's always a good thing. But I'm enjoying every minute of it and doing very well. Thank you.
Good to hear. A lot has been going on in our North Carolina state House of Representatives, and mostly what's been grabbing the news is the issue over gerrymandering. Another word for it is redistricting.
Sure.
How's that going?
Well, right now it's in the courts. The legislators drew, uh, well, let me start even before that. The courts ruled the districts unconstitutional. The legislators in the House and Senate redrew new districts, submitted them to the courts again. The court said that these districts mostly remedied, but did not completely remedy the unconstitutional aspects of it. So the courts called in a special master. He drew them. He drew remedial maps also. The courts have accepted his remedial maps, but now the Republicans in the legislature have appealed to the Supreme Court so that those remedial maps are not used and that the maps that the legislature, which is Republican dominated, so that those maps can be used. So right now we're in a holding pattern. Filing is supposed to begin this coming Monday, February 12th of 2018. Hopefully that remains the case, but we're all waiting on the Supreme Court.
They're gonna they even if they accept the new master map, the federal court okayed.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to be get a new number
It
or
won't be a new number, but just a new geographic area.
new
So it
geographic
still
area.
will be
Okay.
number 58, but it will be tilted slightly to the west as opposed to where it is now. It still will be wholly in Greensboro, but not all of Greensboro. It will be all in Greensboro, but not all of Greensboro. And it will be tilted slightly to the west.
Now, will we get additional representatives because of either map?
Great question. We will get one.
Okay.
That's an outstanding question. We will get one. There's a new district that has been drawn that does not have any representative in it now because there's no incumbent that lives in the area that the new district has been drawn. So, great question. Yeah. So, we will get at least one new representative.
But they wouldn't run this election?
They would run this
They
election.
will run
right.
it. Okay.
So, right. So, someone new from Guilford County in that previously in that newly drawn district, there will be someone to represent that we don't have now.
I see. I see. Now, what will happen if they throw out the remastered map? If the Supreme Court hears it and throws it out, will it go back? Just remain the way it is?
It will, as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer. As I understand it, it will go back to the. Well, there are a couple of options. It could go back to the GOP map, or a new map could have to be drawn. And when you're up against a filing deadline and an election deadline, then these things have to happen fast. And I think that has to be a part of the calculus in their decision making. So right now we are filing on February 12th. The primary is in May, early May, and then the general election is in November this year. So all of these things, these competing deadlines. However, again, great history lesson for us. It has happened before in our state that the deadlines and the dates have had to move to accommodate what the court has ruled. So when I said to you earlier, everything is in the court's hands, you see now how that can be the case.
Yeah, I see that. So we better watch our news. That was going to be my next question.
Sure.
So the deadlines would change. If it sounds like they may change
Could
either
possibly,
way.
right? Could change, or the ruling could come down again any moment now. And the ruling, if the Supreme Court says we won't take up this case, then the deadlines that are already in place would automatically kick into into effect. So
I see.
the filing period is February 12th through February 28th for candidates who desire to run, and then the May primary, and then the November general election.
Okay. All right. So that's a lot for folks in the area to think about. Do you feel that this new remastered map is a map that equally represents folks along Democratic and Republican lines?
I think that gerrymandering has been an issue in our state for a long time, regardless of the party in control. And I think that the best way to handle who votes where or for whom is to have an independent redistricting commission, bipartisan but independent, and let that commission draw maps and lines and things of that nature. There was a bill that was proposed in the House this year. It had been proposed in years past. I was glad to sign on as a co-sponsor, but it's sitting in a committee right now. It never saw the light of day on the floor. So that just speaks to the lack of an appetite to give up the control and power of drawing lines for districts. But I think this, in my opinion, and I'm not alone in this, and I'm not alone among Democrats or Republicans, because again, it was a bipartisan piece of legislation that said let's impanel an independent redistricting committee. In 2018, and now I'm getting into my editorial stance, with technology as it is, there's no reason why smart people can't get together, utilize the technology that we have, and allow people to pick their representatives as opposed to having representatives pick their voters. Right now, that's what we have. We have lines that are drawn so that representatives can pick their voters instead of having voters picking their representatives.
That's it makes so much logical sense. But sometimes I've heard it said that a camel is a horse made by a committee.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And that when you get a collection of folks together, that can be the result. Well, one thing I know about you, Representative Quick, is that you work long, hard hours for bipartisan representation.
Sure.
And you've got a lot of legislation under your belt
Sure.
that you have accomplished because you've reached across that aisle.
Sure.
And you've worked with Republican counterparts to assure that you had legislation that was more fairly representative, and that's a commendable thing that I've observed about you from a distance.
Well, thank you.
I want you to talk a little bit about some of the legislative work that you've been doing recently.
Well, I understand and I appreciate that there are Democratic thoughts and values and there are Republican thoughts and values. But at the end of the day, this is North Carolina that has to work for everybody and has to benefit all of our citizens, the same as the United States. There's nothing wrong with having opposing thoughts. I think that one of the great things that makes our country great is that we value opposing thoughts. Everyone doesn't have to think the same way. We're not a dictatorship. We're not a totalitarian society. There is strong opposition, and that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, I think that our values and our thoughts and our ideas have to, at some point, meet the needs of our citizens. And so there are Republican legislators in Guilford County that I have worked with. Representative Jon Hardister, I'm not afraid to even give credit where credit is due. Representative Jon Hardister has done a great job of reaching across the aisle my way, as I have done with him, and we've got some things accomplished, particularly around the areas of education and those other things. Now, I don't agree with him on many things about education, but what has happened is we have said, let's find where we can agree and work there, and then on the things that we don't agree on, we'll just continue to hammer away at our thoughts on that. I'm a strong advocate for education, having spent 12 years on the Guilford County Schools Board of Education. I recognize that charter schools are here and that they're not going anywhere, and I value education enough to know that there are some instances when charter schools may be able to assist families in a way that traditional schools can't. My contention with that is, if we're going to support charter schools, let's not do it at the expense of traditional public schools where still 90% of our students are educated. In North Carolina, we're taking away money from traditional public schools, giving it to charter schools, and it's at the expense and the detriment of our traditional public schools, where again 90% of our students are still educated. That's one area where there's disagreement. My response to those who support charter schools is that's all well and good, but if the legislator wants to support charter schools, then why not create budget funding for charter schools and not take it away from traditional public schools?
Well, as a mother, one of my daughters is a teacher, and I understand that she's not alone. There's teachers throughout this state that reach into their own pockets because the budget has been cut so much, and they already get a limited salary. So it's not, even though this is something that strikes home, and that having been a teacher myself, I understand what that's like. It becomes a way of life, but it's something that, as you well say, in a society that we have so much technology, so much knowledge and ability, we ought to be able to allocate budgetary resources so that teachers are not put into that kind of financial obligation.
Sure, absolutely. Again, having been on the school board here for 12 years, what you say is not it's probably the rule and not the exception. I can't think of any teacher that I've met in 12 years on the board and even in my time in the legislature that has not at some point in time reached into her or his pocket and used their own personal money to pay for supplies that ought to be paid for by the system, by the state, by the federal government, so that our kids can learn. And teachers deserve every pat on the back they get, and probably more than they get. And it was disconcerting to me that in the federal tax law that was just passed, you had the tax credit that teachers could use up to $500 tax credit for buying supplies. That's gone away, and that's just or that was being discussed to be taken away. How do you even I just cannot fathom that, except to say this, that there are people who are making laws who don't know the reality on the ground.
Yes.
And do not visit in these classrooms, do not talk to teachers. They talk to lobbyists. They don't talk to people on the ground. And you can't really know what's going on unless you're on the ground talking to teachers who will give you real anecdotal examples of how they have had to pay out of their pocket, or how they've had to go without, or how they've had to improvise in our children's education. And isn't that bothersome? I hope it's bothersome to every listener that in the richest, most prosperous, greatest nation on earth, our teachers are improvising, are lacking, and doing without. That's just totally unacceptable.
It's something that goes without words. And speaking of these budgetary discussions that's been going on in the House of Representatives, I'm aware that a stay had been placed on some of the regulations that were going to limit the number of teachers hired. And so many school systems were considering eliminating specials teachers, which would mean art, PE, special Spanish teachers, and so forth. What's the status of that particular piece of discussion and legislative work?
I believe, I don't know, sitting where we are today on Tuesday, February the 6th, we have been called into session. I believe by the end of this week that there will be some remedy attempted for that you speak of, which is a very real possibility that school districts are having to plan for the elimination of certain teachers and specials, which again is so unfathomable to me that in this nation we're really talking about taking away from a well-rounded education. A well-rounded child they get math, they get science, they get social studies, language arts, and all those things, but they also get PE, art, music. That's what makes a well-rounded child.
Yes, it's a well-rounded brain. Both sides of the brain
absolutely.
need to be engaged in order to collectively function well.
And just think of this also, even if we come out this week with a solution, that's a slam dunk solution, we have spent months having superintendents and school boards plan for the worst case scenario, time that they could have been using to do other things, to plan for advancement rather than planning for a doomsday scenario that may or may not come. And it's a tremendous waste of time.
Yes.
What we're doing to education in this state is we are dismantling a social safety net, which is education. All through our lives, we've heard education is the main and strongest rung on the ladder of upward mobility. You have to get your education to move upward in most cases. And we are dismantling that, which will have generational repercussions. It not only will it hurt today, but it's going to hurt generationally.
Yes.
Because when these third grade students who have not had the specials or who have not had adequate reading time and those things, what's going to happen when they get in high school and they haven't had the support that they need?
Mm-hmm.
This is generational. And then they become parents themselves. And it's generational. It's terrible. It's unacceptable. Yes. And it must stop. If there is any area where there should be common effort to advance, it should be education. We can hammer out thoughts and ideas and theories, no problem. No, I don't have any problem with that. No one has all the good ideas, but it should be a common determination that every child in every school is going to be taught by a well-trained, well-paid, well-motivated educator in a building that is adequately heated in the winter and adequately cooled in the summer, with supplies that are up to date, modern, and advance their education, and they will receive a well-rounded education. Now, that's not a Republican idea. That's not a Democratic idea. That's just a good idea, and I would hope that everybody could agree that that should be the foundation of our education system. Right. Unfortunately, it's not. Teachers are not well paid. Schools are not adequate. The infrastructure of education is something that we don't talk about a lot, but I know firsthand that there are students who sit in their classrooms with winter coats on in the winter because they are cold, and students who sit in their classroom uncomfortably hot in the summer because the building is not cool. This is America. That cannot be the case.
I have to say I agree. And you refer to the doomsday scenario, and that is that so many teachers would be simply fired. And for those who are listening, who may be themselves been indoctrinated in that students we need to focus on reading and writing and math, these reading and writing and math skills are not engaged in a child when a child doesn't have music and art.
Right.
And because the music and art helps children to learn math.
Right.
And math is essential for advancement. Most parents do realize that. So even though I hear Republican-minded folks not understanding those concepts that, we want the kids to have the music and math and art, but we got to eliminate something. Well, then the case has to be more understandably made that the music and math parts that engage the right side of the brain help the entire child to process reading, to process math and science and social studies effectively. They need that PE. They need to understand and to be able to take a break like that. And during the day, the way that education has been created is a very holistically well-functioning one when it's funded properly. So I'm so glad again to hear you speak about this as a holistic, it's a human need, not a Republican or a Democrat.
Absolutely. I said to my Republican colleagues all the time, the children of Republican parents are sitting in classrooms that are uncomfortable too. The children of Republican parents are sitting in classrooms with textbooks that still have Bill Clinton listed as president. These are very real examples, and those textbooks don't care that they go into the hands of a child of a Democratic household or a child of a Republican household. Is it not bothersome that we are 3 presidents removed from President Clinton, and there are still textbooks that the most recent president they have listed in it is William Jefferson Clinton?
It's hard to consider that is the reality here.
Right.
In North Carolina, which is not always considered a backward state. In fact, when most people cite states in the Union that have the most challenge, they consider states such as South Carolina or Mississippi, not to demean those states, but those are always at the top of the listed states with economic challenge.
Sure.
So it is concerning to hear that you're talking about it in this way. But I want to thank you. You're coming in pre-record this interview on a Tuesday.
Sure.
And I know that hopefully your hard work that's going to happen. You work during the time that we have our live show, but I'm hoping for that update that progress is going to be made on that. And I know you are also an advocate for the police, and you have had been bipartisan work that's accomplished a great deal for the police. You want to talk a little bit about the status of that? Or
I have worked for that we would have good, honest law enforcement, and that we would have mechanisms in place when we don't have good, honest law enforcement for that to be dealt with and for the public trust to be maintained. When we have incidences that primarily break down along racial lines that lead to a distrust in the police department, I think that hurts our entire society. I was the Police Benevolent Society gave me a certificate and a commendation for the fact that I supported legislation and spoke out on the floor about legislation that allows police officers who serve as whistleblowers within departments to not be retaliated against. It's something that's important for the Police Benevolence Association. It's something that's important for me. When an officer sees wrongdoing or sees practices that are harmful, an officer should be able to speak up against those practices without the threat of retaliation. And so I was glad to support that we would continue to provide for good, honest, strong law enforcement that is equitable, that is fair, that does away with some of the disproportionality that we see, that breaks down along race and often along race and gender. And I will continue to support those efforts. The police have a very valuable, important, and strong role in our society. That's not going to go away. If something happens at my house or in my neighborhood or that I see while I'm out, I'm calling the police. And I would like to know that a well-trained, professional, honest officer is going to show up to deal with that matter. They are the first contact for our law, for our criminal justice system, and so they should be supported. But by the flip side of that same coin, they should be held to a high standard because of the power that they have. So I absolutely support good, solid, honest, fair, and equitable law enforcement.
And you got those cameras, helped get those in place in North Carolina. That like I know in Guilford County, our Greensboro City of Greensboro Police Department all have those body cams that they wear.
Sure.
And you were instrumental in making that happen.
I'd like to see it go a step further, that that the footage, particularly when there's controversy, that the footage be more readily available to the public. I think that leads to trust in our law enforcement. And the fact of the matter is, most law enforcement contacts and interactions with citizens is fairly, I hate to use the term mundane, because all of us, when we see the blue lights and we may have been speeding, that makes all of us a little nervous. But most of our law enforcement officers are professional and they handle those things. They are courteous. But then the ones who are not give a black eye to the ones who are. And so, again, the bill that allowed the whistleblowing, I think is a good bill. Also, the body cam footage should be made available. If the body cam footage says that the officer acted correctly, then that leads to credibility for the entire department and for police officers everywhere. If the footage shows that the officer acted incorrectly, unprofessionally, or illegally, that too is something that the general public should know.
It helps us make it better, and,
Right.
and people to learn from that. In my opinion, police are the professionals in our society that need the most support and training at the same time, because they experience those conflicts.
One of my best friends is a police officer here in Greensboro, and I tell him all the time that I appreciate the work that the police do, and we just want to make it better. We don't want officers looking over their shoulder to see what may happen. but we do want officers to know that we are interested in police community interaction, and we want to make it stronger, particularly in the African American community. There's a inherent distrust, and I think it goes both ways. I think police officers come into some African American communities, particularly those of lower wealth, and they come in with a certain mindset. I think that members of the African American community in general have a leeriness about law enforcement that some may not understand, but it is not unfounded, and it is not ridiculous that the African American community feels the way it feels. When you look at the disproportionality, when you look at some of the cases that have been national, a reasonable person would understand that, or this community, that needs to be some work done in improving those relations.
I have to say that I agree, and I have interviewed and know many professional policemen veterans who have voiced the exact same sentiments, that this is an area that needs continued light shone on it and work. And I'm glad to hear you talk about it. Well, this month is Black History Month, and I've dedicated this whole month to interviewing agencies and organizations who are in support to honor Black History Month in any way. Are you attending any events that you'd like to lift up?
Oh, sure. This is an important month for our community, our nation. The history of Africans and Africans in America and African Americans is a very important history. I just really love. I'm a history buff anyway, so I love all types of history. And then when we have this month that's dedicated to showing our entire country the contributions of Africans who were brought here and African Americans who were born here, to see how this whole fabric of America is woven together by all people, I think it's something that can be appreciated. I think this month is great. Every February, I dedicate myself to rereading Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. I think it's been updated 6 times. I think we're in the 6th edition now. I'm reading it now, and it's just a fascinating story of Africans and African Americans that really I would just highly recommend to anyone. It's not a date and event book. It actually makes you feel like you are there, the way that Mr. Bennett has used documentation and diaries and journals and legal papers, and has really done extensive research. It is a wonderful book. I pastor a church. We're celebrating African American History Month this month. We're having African drummers to come in. We're having our children to act out different persons and personalities on the 25th of February. I'm also going to many of the events that are taking place around our community. I was at the February 1 breakfast. What a wonderful place we are sitting in. Mm-hmm. Greensboro in North Carolina was so influential and instrumental in the history of civil rights and African American history. Even this college campus that we're sitting on, there's a wealth of history in Guilford College campus for the history of the people who are a part of this nation. And I also want to, I preached a sermon on Sunday that was entitled "Don't Forget to Remember," which talked about making sure, it came from the book of Exodus, where God tells Moses, "When I have delivered you, don't forget to tell your sons and your sons' sons what I have done." And I think that's the same thing in this nation. I think all of us should tell our children what has happened, and I believe has happened by the hand of God, how different races have come together and have propelled this nation into greatness by working together and not breaking into camps and factions and only looking out for self. The history of African Americans in this nation, where would we be without white allies who have William Garrison and people like that? If you look at the founding of the NAACP, you will see that that was a diverse group that founded the NAACP. And so I think that a true glimpse of our history will show that we've worked together a lot more than we may think that we have, and that the continued struggle is ongoing. But there is much that we can celebrate. And so you asked me what time it is. I told you how to make a watch. I'm sorry for talking.
No, no, I'm
but,
glad
but
you
I
talked
just
about
get
it.
excited about learning history and being able to demonstrate history and how much history is just around us. Charlotte Hawkins Brown House, that's right up in Sedalia, North Carolina. February 1, the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, that's
of course
right
on the
downtown.
Woolworths.
Right,
Yes.
right. All of the history is all
Woolworths,
around us.
it's actual where the restaurant was, which is now stands a museum.
Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
that's where and then they had Jesse Jackson come this
Sure.
year to our little Greensboro, North Carolina, which was kind of nice.
Right.
Some wonderful events, and as you say, don't forget to remember what is important. And I'm going to look up that book.
Sure.
Before the Mayflower, you said it was?
Before the Mayflower, right.
Okay, so it's
Wonderful
a history book. Of a history of African Americans being brought to this country, or
it's a history that begins prior to Africans being brought to this nation, but it continues up through. Like I said, it's the 6th edition, so it doesn't get all the way to where we are now. But if you read it, it's a page turner. When you say history to some people, they automatically, I don't know. You know, people just think dates and
so it's not
events.
just a presentation of fact. It's a page turner. So it's an interesting, compelling read. Okay.
I would say it's facts presented in an interesting, engaging way.
Okay, it's something to check out. Well, the last topic I was considering just checking in with you about is the one that's been getting some attention in the news about the pipeline going through North Carolina and the protests that sprung up around that. Tell us a little bit about how that might impact this area of North Carolina or just North Carolina in general.
So, for my re-election, there are 4 areas that I'm concerned about: education, employment, empowerment, and the environment. Representative Pricey Harrison, who's here in Greensboro, has been my mentor and has tutored me on many environmental issues that I did not know the in-depth details about. So I have to commend Representative Pricey Harrison for the work that she has done. Also, Senator Gladys Robinson, who has also opened my eyes to the fact that there are environmental concerns that we all should be concerned about. So again, I want to commend Senator Gladys Robinson for that. You asked about the pipeline. The dangers of putting a pipeline through our state and the potential for spills and the contamination of our environment and our drinking water. Let us be mindful that right now, Gen X is a chemical that is in drinking water in certain parts of our state. That is a huge concern for both Republicans and Democrats. Representative Deb Butler from New Hanover County is fighting a yeoman's fight against chemicals in our water. In Stokes County, which is very close to our county, there are families that for over 1,000 days have been drinking bottled water and using bottled water for household activities and necessities because of contamination or potential contamination from coal ash. Imagine 1,000 days. That's 3 years of people using bottled water to make coffee, to take baths, to wash their babies. 3 years in North Carolina, in Stokes County. And now we talk about a pipeline. Now, I'm all for economic empowerment. I understand we have to grow and expand our economy. But I think when we begin to loosen regulations and to open up our environment to the highest bidder in pursuit of more dollars, we have to look at the flip side of that coin. And the flip side of that coin could be loss of recreational use of our environment. Again, water use, which we all need water. I saw a story the other day, Cape Town, South Africa. is down to what they are calling 0 day, where they may not have any water. In Cape Town, South Africa, a very modern, cosmopolitan city, has a water threat right now. And lest we get so comforted in the fact that we don't have discomfort right now, it could happen here.
Yes, it
Because
could.
in Stokes County, people are using bottled water. And I just don't think that's a story that's told enough. And so I'm all for economic advancement. I'm all for the expansion of our economy. But I'm not all for it at any cost. And the threats to the environment, we are only the current caretakers of our environment. We have to hand off what was handed to us, and I believe by the hand of God, to be current caretakers of and stewards. And we have to hand it to our children and grandchildren. And I just don't want to be a part of a generation that hands our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren a contaminated environment.
So putting this pipeline through North Carolina is going to more contaminate the water systems that it goes through?
It could. Who wants to take that risk? Remember the Keystone Pipeline, when it was opened up, and the pipeline that went through South Dakota, Standing Rock.
Yes.
There was a spill there, a 200,000 gallon oil spill that was there. It happened. What the Native Americans that were out there protesting might happen happened, and media didn't cover it, so we don't know that we're not engaged that it happened, but it happened.
Maybe they covered it locally, but national
And
media,
just right.
So not very much on there.
Not very much on it. With our attention span being now 30 seconds, and tell me something else.
Yes.
But that has generational repercussions. Governor Cooper just vowed to fight against offshore drilling for oil off the coast of North Carolina. Now, my Republican friends, and I don't use that term to be funny, my Republican friends say, if we can get oil from our own shores, our own land, then it makes us less dependent on volatile Middle Eastern governments in the Middle East. I get that. It makes sense to me. But do we sacrifice the health and safety of our water, our children, our land, our enjoyment of what God has given us? Is that worth it in pursuit of a dollar? Again, we're living in a technological generation. How do we get off oil? How do we use other
sources of
energy to drive our cars and should we not be finding new ways to provide transportation? Should we not be supporting regional transportation? Less cars on the road, less pollution in the air. And some people, when you talk about environment, people want to label you a tree hugger and all that. Well, someone has to hug the trees. I mean, we have to have, we're looking at expansion. We're building shopping centers, building apartments. We're tearing down where I live. There's a huge new apartment complex that has gone up. And then right down the street, there's another one that's coming. And I'm thinking, my goodness, where are all these people coming from? And also, not only that, how do we protect safe green spaces, because we're going to need them?
Yes, we are. We only got the one planet. And I have to say, if you haven't seen the movie Erin Brockovich,
Okay.
the Oscar-winning movie, for a very good reason, it so beautifully exemplifies both a Republican or a Democratic experience of water contamination and what happens to all humans.
Right.
Water contamination doesn't know political party.
Right.
It doesn't know fast money versus I don't want to do that. If that is putting more time and money into building renewable resources. You know, when the car came along, it was a very expensive commodity at first. And it took a while for it to be affordable for all families, but with people collectively working together, it didn't take very long.
Sure.
So you make a valid point. We are humans. We have to have air and water to survive. And at some point, as caregivers for our children, ourselves, even today.
Sure.
With people, I'm shocked to hear about this Stokes County water
Sure.
issue. It does need to be a more, even just a statewide coverage of this experience, that these folks are having to actually drink bottled water to protect them from getting cancers and other terrible ailments that come along with water
Sure.
contamination. One spill is enough to do something like that. So these issues that you are, environment being one of the 4 pillar issues that you are fighting for, remind us again of the other 3.
Education, employment, empowerment, and environment. When I say empowerment, that's that all of our populations feel a part of our society. We see the movement now with women becoming more empowered. So I, certainly, as a father of 2 daughters, 2 young adult daughters, I believe that we have stifled the empowerment of women for far too long. And whenever we hold any population back, it is my thought that we are holding back the progress of our society, because all populations can contribute to our advancement. And so I'm for empowering all populations, that they can use their skills, gifts, talents, and powers to benefit everyone. So I look forward. Hopefully, the voters of District 58 will allow me to continue to represent them, and I will continue to work on those, on education, on employment, empowerment, and thanks to Senator Gladys Robinson and Representative Pricey Harrison for opening my eyes and illuminating that the environment is not a fringe issue. It is. We all live in the environment.
We all need water.
We all need water, and it has to be one of the paramount issues of our time.
I have to say I agree. Would there be anything else you'd like to present to us about your work?
Well, I enjoy being at the North Carolina State House. I'm really enjoying. I'm a Democrat, so I'm serving at a time when the GOP has a supermajority, and so I look forward to voters allowing democratic ideas to bubble up a little bit by voting and allowing that. I absolutely enjoy working with Governor Roy Cooper, who I think is a very forward-thinking, very progressive governor. But I will also say I enjoy the give and take with Republicans, particularly Republican members of the Guilford County delegation. I enjoy the exchange of ideas, and I'm not one that thinks that all good ideas are contained in one place. And I think good ideas can come from a lot of different places. And so I look forward to continuing to serve, continuing to learn and to grow, and to, as I learn and grow, and seniority is rewarded in the state house and in the state legislature. And if I'm able to stay, and I pray that I am, that the seniority that I would be able to attain will be a benefit to Guilford County, to Greensboro, but also to the state of North Carolina. And we can get back to our place where we used to lead the Southeast. North Carolina was, as you pointed out earlier, we were the guiding light in the Southeast and one of the guiding lights in the nation. We have taken a step back, but North Carolina deserves better, and I hope that I can be a part of leading us to a better future, so that we can, when my time is done, that I am handing off a better North Carolina to the people and the generations that come behind me. That's my guiding principle.
Well, thank you so much for your service to us, North Carolinians, and thank you for coming on to Seeking Justice today.
Always enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for bringing issues to the forefront that often are not delved into on our major mass media. Again, we seem to get 15 to 30 seconds on issues that really should take some deep dives so that people can completely understand that some things should be very concerning to us as we just go about our day.
Well, thank you. You are the one that's really giving those issues voice, and we are all the benefactors of it.
Have a great day. Thank you again.
I hope you do too. Bye-bye.